Hi, I'm Gordon Burkell from Filmmaker U. At Filmmaker U, we create courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify your existing skill set. You can learn more at filmmakeru.com, or of course follow us on Instagram at filmmaker_u. Each week we interview a film professional to discuss their work, and this week I'm joined by editor Sean Albertson, whose work includes Warrior, Rambo, and more recently the scary movie Imaginary in theaters now. Welcome to the show, Sean.
Thank you. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so I guess how did you get, well, let me step back a second. Your father worked as an editor as well.
He did.
So what did you learn from him that you use in your career every day? Is there something that, you picked up from him?
Sure. I mean, my dad, my father was a chef and a musician before he became a film editor. And w- it's a longer story, but by the time I got to the point where I thought, oh, maybe I will try film editing, I was also a musician, and I was potentially headed to culinary school. And through a few experiences and someone just asking me to edit a senior thesis project at New York University, because they heard I was in an editing family, and I had no experience, just none.
Yeah.
And um, and so I went to my dad, and he was like, "Yeah, I'll help you. Like, I'll walk you through it. I'll sort of talk to you and your director through the process." And within that process with my dad, he was able to show me what um, what I love about cooking and music in filmmaking, but film editing specifically. There are so many elements to film editing that I think are so connected to the art of uh, cooking. And it's so much trial and error, and a little bit of this and take out a little bit of that, or try a little more of this spice, and y- and also I was a singer and a percussionist in when I was playing music, and um man, percussion, like in terms of film editing and timing, and it just all became sort of one and the same to me. And so in that regard, like, my dad really showed me the love I could have for filmmaking, and again, film editing specifically.
My friends and I would make little videos in our backyards, imitations of Indiana Jones and Star Wars. Eventually that need to tell stories became more of a technical interest and an interest in the art. To me, what's exciting is using cinema in its full potential, which is rhythm and sound design and music. Our job is to set up expectations and then deliver on them. I'm Brian Cates, and this is my course in film editing.
So now this is your sixth project with Jeff Wadlow.
Mhm.
So how did you guys first meet, and how did you go about building that relationship to maintain it for six episodes, or sorry,
Yeah.
six films?
Yeah, I mean, the, for me, that's sort of the dream, right? Is to have a director who you just have a great collaborative, creative working relationship with. And so I'll just start by saying I'm super grateful for my relationship with Jeff. So he was doing a Netflix movie years ago called True Memoirs of an International Assassin. Um, uh, the line producer on that movie is a dude named Guy. I can't remember his last name, amazingly. Love this dude. And he had been the line producer on Rocky Balboa. had just thrown my name in, said, this guy Sean is really talented. You should meet him. We met for coffee. We hit it off creatively. He hired me for the job, and it just went well. I mean, we really enjoyed working with each other. And there's always when I'm working with a director for the first time, there's that sort of like dating period where I, I, I don't want to, because I'm very opinionated. I believe as an editor, I'm a writer and part DP and camera operator and redirector of performances, and so I have a lot of thoughts, opinions, ideas in the process. And when I start with a director for the first time, I got to feel them out and see like how far are they okay with me pushing these ideas, and how do I present those ideas best to this particular person, right? And so, but with Jeff, there was very little of that sort of psychology in it for me. He's just a straightforward guy, and it'd just be like, he'd say like, "What do you think?" And I'd be like, and he'd go, "Just tell me, like, what do you think? Like, give me the truth. What do you?" And I love that about him as a filmmaker. And so we very quickly gained a creative trust on that film. And I'm also, one thing I also like to be and try to be for filmmakers that I work for is a bit of a go-between. Every time we get notes from producers or stars or studio executives, that can be that can be a bit of an ego. It can bang your ego around a little bit. You've worked so hard to create this, whatever this vision is. And I like to, when I can, try to separate my director from that process to the extent that, uh, 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 we get the notes, and a lot of times myself and the director will look at them and be like, "Oh, that's a stupid note. Like, what, it's ridiculous. And why are they saying this? And don't they know? And all the things we did." And so what I like to do is to separate my ego from that, and and if the director will allow me to separate the director from that process just at the beginning, so I can say, okay, let me just take a look at all these. Let me go through and see what I can come up with all the things that we don't want to do. And I think that that also has enabled us as a team to make sure that all of our producers are heard, and our studio executives are heard, and they understand that like we're working with them. We're not just trying to make some like auteur, whatever we think is best, because Jeff and I both are we're artists, but we're in a business. We're business people, and both of our goals is to make this art for the masses. As we want as many people to be affected by this art, so that it makes money and we have a chance to do it again. So that's sort of how the relationship came to be. And it's, for me, I assume for Jeff, because he keeps hiring me, for me, it progresses and gets better and better. There's more trust, there's more openness. We sometimes have little combative episodes of creativity, which I also sometimes think is just an important part of the process. But we're like a married couple. Like we'll have an argument and we'll get through it and we'll keep moving forward, and both of us are willing to be wrong.
Well, you mentioned in your answer that, you sort of see yourself as, a filmmaker in the sense of all the different parts. But in this project, you were involved in most of the stages, right? From writing and rewriting the script to the effects, you were sort of overseeing things and color
Yeah.
correction. So, outside of your editing scope, what were some of the things you tackled in this
Yes.
normally?
So it's interesting that I now tend to get co-producer credit on, or some sort of producer credit on a lot of the projects I end up being hired to edit because, and all I'll say about this is like I don't really know how other editors do what they do. This has just become inherent in how I do my job, and it's it partly started when we went from film to digital. Just the ability to be responsible for more of the creative process as an editor. I've just always lapped up. I've always studied filmmaking. I study screenwriting. I write as a practice. I study directing and photography, and I read about how to make movies, and I always have, and so because I believe that I'm a storyteller for the screen. That's my job, um and interestingly, like I'm getting off track a little bit here, but I think I may be wrong about this, but e- editing is the only the only art that was developed for and specific to filmmaking, storytelling for the screen, and because of the way technology has changed over the years, it's enabled me to be a part of all those arts, right? And so, um, I have this little wonderful side gig as a sort of a fix it editor, and 9 times out of 10, if the producers were to ask me like, well, why do you think we're in this position of having to bring somebody in to fix this project? I would say 9.9 times out of 10, it's the script. The script was not ready to shoot, should not have been greenlit. They needed at least another rewrite, if not another 6 months of development, whatever. And so what I like to do, and when I'm working with somebody I've worked with before, like Jeff or Andy Irwin, who's another director I work with, they'll send me the scripts at first draft, whatever draft is, they've decided to make, or often before then. And I give copious notes, and I have a lot of thoughts and a lot of ideas. Like I said, I'm very opinionated. Um, and but I have a lot of experience at this, right? I've been doing this a long time. I know, I can see on the page often when there's a pitfall that we're going to hit in post production. Um, Sometimes, I think there's an issue and a pitfall, like a joke doesn't land, but of course, once they cast that role and that brilliant comedic actor finds a way to find a truth in that bit of comedy, they're going to bring something to it that I'm not reading into it. So there's a balance, right? Like I give these copious notes, and sometimes they're taken, sometimes they're not. When they're not, I like to say in post production, "I told you, you should have listened to me when I gave you that script note." But so yeah, so I'm a part of the process from there. On this particular movie, it was Jeff and Greg and Jason who wrote the script, all fantastically talented guys, and so wonderfully open to ideas. And so when on the occasions when I did have a chance to be with all three of them talking about the script, it was like a writer's room. It was just such a lovely creative experience. And then, sort of further down the line on your question, Jeff will get me involved in design elements, right? So I'll get emails of that things that the production designer is sending out for design elements, creature creation, development, visual effects development, all of that kind of stuff. And um, and you know, I try not to, because I'm not like the physical producer of the movie who is like responsible for like making sure this is all getting, so I'm more of a creative producer. So what I try to do at that stage in pre-production is, if I have any thoughts on those elements, I don't present them to the production designer or the VFX people or the creature people. I just go to Jeff and I just say, hey, just so you know, this is what I'm thinking. This is what I think of that. Here's what, you know, here's what I'd like to see. Here's whatever. And so, you know, Jeff, being brilliant at taking 1,000 ideas thrown at him and making a final decision, will take it or leave it. And and then to go further with your question, so, you know, the obvious editing process, a picture editing process occurs. I won't show anything outside of our editing room without doing a comprehensive sound and music pass. And it's not just, and I know a lot of editors are like this, it's not just a shitty sound and music pass, or, you know, just so you have an idea. It's like, with the time allotted, which is usually not much, we do the most comprehensive sound and music job we can do. And I say we, meaning me and my crew, my assistants. If we have the pleasure of having a music editor on that early, sometimes our brilliant sound supervisor and designer, Matt Waters, will get involved with us super early, and he'll help us with that process. But but so me and my editing crew, my picture editing crew, are part of the sound design, and ultimately the score of the movie, far before those post-production professionals get to put their hands on it. And so what ends up happening is, we've created a template. We've been working with our director for months, dialing that in, because when we show director's cut, we want it to look and sound as close to a finished movie as we can, and we have the ability to do that. Hopefully, we have the talent to do that, and then once we lock picture and really go into the post-production process with our sound people and our composers, we are, you know, I've already spent so much time designing all of that stuff that, again, with a guy like Jeff, he trusts me to be a, you know, an imperative part of that process as well. So we get, you know, music from our composers, and I have sometimes copious notes. Sometimes it's like, oh my God, it's great, you nailed it. Sometimes, unfortunately for them, we have temp love. We've done a temp score, and there are things we just love about what we temped that, you know, and I know composers are dealing with this like crazy all the time now, because, you know, it's like we score our movie with like whatever, like Quiet Place 2 score, and they're like, yeah, but that's not my music, and like I need to do my thing. So yeah, and then obviously color, visual effects, the same thing. It's like, we've been building a template, and I've been working day in and day out with the director, with all of my ideas and thoughts and notes, and so I just become this sort of integral part of that entire process all the way through to the end.
Now, I do have to ask, in terms of editing, you know, for Imaginary, this is the first time you've worked with an inanimate object as a main character.
Yeah.
So what were some of the challenges in that editing process?
Chauncey is so cute. Yeah, it's interesting. I did another interview, and somebody asked me that question, and I read the interview, and it said like, I edit I edited Chauncey the same way I edit any human performer. And I read that and I was like, well, that was a stupid thing to say. But what I realized is, it's actually true that there was, you know, I can't say it was a particular challenge. Like, I look at movies like Annabelle, and you know, and it's obviously inanimate creature, object, horror characters have been there's a ton of movies that I could call out that have done it before. So, but I can't say I found it challenging in that, and I really do edit it the same way I edit any particular character, because what occurs to me when answering that question is a lot of times, a lot of what I do is trying to tell the audience how to feel about a particular thing that has happened or a particular thing that a character has just said, right? So, um, and often the way I do that is to find a reaction from the other character in the scene, um, and cut to that reaction. And sometimes, kind of often, I don't have the reaction I'm looking for from the other character in the scene. And so I will either find a neutral reaction from that character, or I'll go, before the director said action or after the director said cut, and look for an out of character thing that I can use to manipulate. But more often than not, even if I use a neutral look from the other character in the scene, it's all about where that reaction shot is placed specifically. At what point do we cut to that reaction shot? Is it right after somebody said this incredible thing, or we just saw this crazy thing happen? And so when cutting to Chauncey, it was really about like, what's the what's the human trait or emotion that I'm trying to project into this inanimate object to tell the audience that he's thinking a particular thing or he's planning a particular thing. And so again, it's really just about like, exactly when do we cut to him? Which angle do we use? And we did have slightly modulated Chauncey faces, very, very subtly modulated faces. We had a what we called the happy face, what we call the angry face, but the changes were incredibly subtle. And so, which version of that face do we cut to? It really it and then trial and error. Of course, we show it to people, and they're like, why, what is he thinking there? And so, it's again, I can't say it was challenging, but it was fun.
Yeah. It was like you were doing your own tool shelf experiments.
Exactly. That's that's it. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
And it works, right? That experiment showed us that is the truth of film editing.
Probably one of the smartest things I've ever done for my career. It gave me all the tools that I needed to be able to jump into a new career.
Getting myself into a mindset, thinking like an editor, and being around people that I can talk to on that level was really invaluable to me.
A lot of the things that I learned from that class, I still think about.
I loved the classroom. I loved the computer stations. We built a sense of community.
And it also instills a lot of confidence in you to take that and go out into the world.
After I took the class, I felt very prepared to take the next step.
I owe Manhattan Workshop the career that I have right now. Things have been going great, and I really have the Manhattan Workshop to thank for that.
Now, I do want to ask, and I don't know if you'll be able to answer it, but what does it take to build a scare or build a moment that scares people? Like, what goes into it? Like, is there any insight you can give us into that from an editorial perspective?
I mean, it's something I kind of learn on every scary, creepy horror project I work on. And I was not a connoisseur of horror films before I did my first Blumhouse film a few years ago. So, like anything, it's been a lovely learning experience from some of the brilliant people over at Blumhouse who really know this genre and know their audience. I will say that I find editing horror very similar to editing comedy, in that timing, extremely specific timing goes into selling either a joke or a scare. I also think that that there are usually at least 3 different ways to present a scare to an audience if you have enough footage, if you've got, you know, the right footage to do it. I think the same thing about a joke, right? So in terms of a scare, you know, the question might be on a particular scare, you know, do you, you know, let's say you have a protagonist creeping and walking and being scared. Do you cut to the monster really fast to get the audience to jump out of their seat and then cut to the, you know, the protagonist reaction? Or do you let the protagonist walk around and then reveal the scary thing monster in that same shot, which is maybe less of a jump scare, more of a holy shit moment? Do you let your protagonist see something super frightening and not show it, and then, you know, and then make the cut? Or maybe you never see your monster, and maybe the scare is, you know, there have been times where it's like, let's say maybe a scare is not working particularly, and so we let our protagonist see something and we're in on their face, and they're, you know, they're reacting, and then we cut outside, and, you know, and the next thing you know, in another scene, they've been killed or they've been whatever. So, you know, each scare is different with its design, and then within its design, again, I usually find there's at least 3 ways to present it. And so it all becomes about, you know, first, what works for me in the moment when I'm first putting it together, then showing it often to my crew and asking them how they feel about it. Then, of course, showing it to the director. Then, of course, showing it to producers. And so we go through this kind of test screening process with every scare until we get to our actual test screening, which is the big test of like a room, you know, full of like 300, 400 people. How did they react? And at that point, you know, once we get to the preview process, that's why I think for me, previewing is so important, particularly for comedies and horrors. I I I I will tell anybody, if you're making a horror or comedy, you have to preview the fuck out of it. And you've got to put cameras facing your audience with night vision, so, you know, you can watch their reactions, see what works, see what doesn't work, because those are the people we're making the movies for.
It's interesting because I always heard the rumor that Judd Apatow used to record the audience's laughter and put it in as a laugh track.
Yep.
You do something similar for yours?
Oh,
Drop in
yeah.
a scare track, see where
Yep.
people screamed and
Yep.
didn't?
So what we do is, people used to get so mad at me for wanting to do this on my movies way back when. I guess it wasn't popular, but now it's pretty darn popular. So what we do is, I always try to make sure we have 2 infrared cameras that are on either side of the screen pointing toward the audience, microphones in the audience, and you know, just try to capture as much of the audience as possible on screen. And then what we do is, after the preview, we get that footage, we get that video footage. Of course, we record the focus group as well, which is really helpful. But you know, and at these previews, you do a focus group with 20 people, you have everybody fill out a card, gives you all this information about what they thought, how they felt. That's all great and really important. What's most important to me are those cameras. And again, more in comedy and horror than any other genre, that is the most important thing to me. And so I take those 2 streams of video and all the audio from it, and my crew will line it up in the editing system, and, you know, so what I'm watching is like a little, you know, a little square of my movie up here, and then I've got 2 audience cameras here, and I'm listening to the audio only from the theater. And it's sunk up with this little thing of my movie. And so we start getting, of course, after a preview, you get notes from every executive and every producer, and sometimes, the perception of what happens when you're actually sitting in the room is, you can really project your own issues into it, right? I've been in previews where I'm like, oh my God, none of that worked because I think I'm shit and I can't do, I'm terrible at what I do. And God, that was terrible and it didn't work. And I don't think the audience was into it. And of course I find out later, first of all, it scored really high, and, and the cards told us they really loved all these elements. And then I'll watch this video and see, holy shit, it really did work. Like I was really projecting my own shit into that audience. And so, and so we'll get a lot of notes from producers and studio people who are like, well, see, this is an issue the audience was having while we were sitting in there, and it's sort of a means to, like, justify this note that maybe we didn't do before. And so what we do is Jeff and I will sit in the room and we'll look at the notes, and as always, I'll try everything if I can before I bring them into the room. And he and I might have an argument as to whether we think something was working in the room or not. We just pull up that video in the editing system and play it. And, I'll either be like, look, everybody jumped out of their seats, or he'll be like, no, you're wrong. And so it's such an amazing tool. And it also allows us to, like, sometimes a scare is kind of working.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, oh, like, but it's not the jump we wanted. And so it and we get to really kind of focus in on, like, what was their reaction? And now we can think about, well, what could just edge it up a little bit more? Did we cut to the creature too fast, or what, and so we can really play with degrees of each thing. Which I just find really fun. I just love that process.
Now, I have one last question for you.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say is your favorite guilty pleasure film or TV show to watch?
Oh, boy, that's a tough one, because that's like, that's like the dreaded question of what's your favorite movie? Like, I don't think I could give you like a top 30. I can give you my current
Yeah.
guilty pleasure, which is a show called The Tourist,
Okay, I haven't seen that one.
which is on Netflix, and it's in Australian / Irish sort of thriller whodunit. And it's a lot of fun, and it's really cheeky, and my wife and I are just really enjoying that show right now. And so that's my current guilty pleasure.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for letting me interview you today.
You got it, Gordon. It's always good to see you.
Yeah. Well, that's it for this week, everyone. Make sure to check us out at filmmakeru.com, or of course on Instagram at filmmaker_you. I'm Gordon Burkell. Thanks for watching.